Ever wanted to learn how to knit a Minecraft creeper? Well, have I got a treat for you. My name is Pam and this is Total Pamarchy, and today I'm going to teach you how to knit a Minecraft creeper, just like this one. So let's get into it. The Minecraft creeper, the creeper of Minecraft, the little guy that scurries along and blows up the house that you took 10 hours to make. Yeah, that guy. We're gonna knit him. The materials you're going to need for this project are a couple of balls of worsted weight yarn, one in green and one in black. You don't need a full ball of black yarn, so if you just have some black worsted weight yarn lying around, you'll be just fine. You also need some 4.5mm US 7 straight needles, some scissors, a darning needle, and a heck of a lot of patience. To make a creeper, you'll want to head on over to the internet and grab some reference photos. Then you'll need some graph paper and a pencil, probably an eraser too. Come on, we all make mistakes. Then you're going to spend some time counting pixels so you have the measurements of your creeper. Just as with the Minecraft cake that I made, and I'll link that video up above in the cards here, each pixel is going to equal a 4-block square of stitches. And each one of those squares in your graph paper is equal to one stitch, one knitted stitch. The creeper is basically made up of squares and rectangles, just like everything else in Minecraft. So you're going to go ahead and break your project down into 3 sections. You'll need a head, a body, and the legs. Using the measurements that you made on your reference photos by counting those pixels, you're going to start drawing out your parts on your graph paper. I began with the head, which is 8 by 8 pixels on my reference photo. Therefore, because each of those pixels is going to equal a 4-block square on my graph paper, my head measurements on the graph paper were therefore 16 by 16 blocks. The head is basically a square with 6 sides, aka a cube. 5 of those squares are going to be exactly the same. They're just 16 by 16 squares. You can color them in green if you like, so you know which ones are which. You don't really have to do that. I did, but you don't. One of those squares that you're going to make is going to have the face on it. So it's going to be a 16 by 6 square with the face area drawn in. By using my reference photo and just counting over how many pixels the black area of the face started, and then using that to guide me as I sketched out the face where those face black stitches would be. Once I finished mapping out the face, I moved on to the body. I sketched out each side of the body on the graph paper, much like I did with the head. The body is a rectangular prism, or a yarn box if you're my husband and that's what you prefer to call it. It is made up of the front and back sides, the 2 sides of the creeper, and the top and bottom pieces. So you're going to need 2 front and back pieces, 2 sides, and 2 top and bottom, 1 of each. The 2 sides measure 8 by 24 squares. The top and bottom pieces measure 16 by 8 squares. And the front and back pieces measure 16 by 24 squares. Finally, I sketched out the legs in the same manner. Per foot, or legs, you'll need 4. There is one side with the toes that is 8 squares by 12 squares. There are the 3 other sides that are plain green. They are 8 by 12 squares. And there is a top and bottom piece, and they are each 8 by 8 squares. Now comes the fun yet extremely tedious part of knitting every single one of those squares and rectangles. So you might be wondering how you're going to knit those squares. Well, to simplify things, every single measurement that you made on the graph paper is basically your measurements of the squares and rectangles that you're going to knit. So the measurements across the bottom are the amount of stitches that you're going to cast on, and the number of squares going vertically, so up the length of the square or rectangle, that is how many rows you're going to knit in stockinette stitch for each piece. Take the head, for example. Those measurements are 16 by 16. So you're going to cast on 16 stitches and then knit in stockinette stitch, where you knit 1 row and purl the alternating rows for 16 rows. So the first row, the knit row, is counted as 1, the purl row is counted as 2, then you knit again, that's 3, then purl again, that's 4, until you reach 16. And then you're going to cast off knitwise. If you need any instructions for knitting, there's tons of videos out there on the internet that can help you learn. I have a couple of my own. I'll link them up above. In case you're new to knitting and you saw this video and you're really excited and you just wanted to make your own creeper, just do it. Learn how to knit. You can make fun things like this. For the face, I followed the pattern on the graph paper and joined in the black yarn where it was indicated on the graph or chart. Remember to knit all the rows from right to left and purl all the rows from left to right. So you're going to follow your chart when you're on your knit rows from right to left, and when you're on your purl rows, you're going to follow it from left to right. Once you have all of your head pieces knit, you should have 5 green squares and 1 face square. Now it's time to make the rest of the body. There's no color work in the body, so it's a bit easier. As with the head, you'll cast on the number of stitches that the rectangle is wide, and knit and stockinette stitch the number of rows the rectangle is tall. For the front and back pieces, you're going to cast on 16 stitches and knit and stockinette stitch for 24 rows. The side pieces are casting on 8 stitches and knit for 24 rows. And for the top and bottom pieces, you'll cast on 16 stitches and knit and stockinette stitch for 8 rows. Every time you reach the end of a piece, you're going to cast off knitwise. If you haven't guessed it yet, I'm just making a bunch of knitted boxes that I'm going to stuff to make the creeper. I'm gonna be honest here, the creeper feet were my least favorite part to knit, sew together, and sew onto the creeper. And I think it was just because there were so many pieces of each one. The sides, you need to cast on 8 stitches and knit for 12 rows in stockinette stitch. And the top and bottom pieces are casting on 8 stitches and knitting for 8 rows. The toe pieces are casting on 8 stitches and working in 12 rows in stockinette stitch, making sure you work in the black color as we did for the face. So just working in the chart from right to left if you're knitting and left to right if you're purling. Also, when you work in color work, you want to make sure that when you're adding a color, you wrap the yarn around the other yarn in order to not create a hole, as you can see here. So every time I joined in the black and there was a green color there, I just sort of looped the black yarn around the green so that it didn't have separation between the 2 pieces because they're 2 separate colors. And if you don't do that, you'll have a bit of a hole because they're 2 separate colors. Now that all of our pieces are knit, it's time to sew them together to create our little knitted boxes. I started with the feet. I sewed them together with all the right sides facing. There is no right or wrong way to add pieces to the box as you sew. I basically just started with 2 pieces and then kept adding a piece as I went along. So I sewed to the end of that one piece, added another piece, making sure that it was also had right side facing to whatever side I was sewing it on, and sewed around the edges as far as I could with 1 piece of yarn continuously. If I ended up reaching a corner, I would just carry the yarn through a couple of the stitches back to another opening and continue sewing that way. If I needed to join a new piece of yarn, I would just tie it on with a little knot and then sew up those edges. The only thing you want to make sure is to make sure that all of your front side of your pieces are facing the correct way so that when you knit up your box, it's inside out. You don't necessarily have to worry about darning in your ends for this. I didn't want to waste my time darning in all those ends because there was a lot of them. They're all going to be on the inside of your work anyway. And as long as all of your ends are sort of knotted off, especially with the color work, you should be fine. The only other thing you need to remember is to not sew up all of your sides when you're sewing your little cubes or rectangular prisms together. You want to leave a side open so that you can flip it right side out again. Otherwise, you'll be tearing out those stitches and it is not fun to have to do that. Then I flipped the foot box right side out, shoved some stuffing inside, and sewed up the remaining seam. Then I did the same for all the other feet. Aren't they cute? Once I had finished with all the feet, I worked on the body and sewed it together in the same way. I sewed two of the pieces together along one edge and just kept adding pieces, making sure I was adding the correct one depending on which edge of the box I was on, so the top or the sides or the bottom, until I had the box completely sewn together with one side open. Then I flipped it right side out again, stuffed it full, and sewed up that remaining seam. The head is sewn together in the same way. I did try to sew in a continuous line as long as I could around the pieces, just so I didn't have to cut and knot a new piece of yarn on to continue sewing. So I just went around as long as I could. Phew, that was a lot of work, eh? Thank goodness we're almost done. The final step is to sew all your pieces together to make something that marginally resembles a creeper. The only piece of advice I can give you is to make sure that you're sewing everything on the correct way so that you don't sew a foot on upside down like I did and have to undo all of your stitches and redo it, because it really sucks. So just kind of pay more attention than I did when you're sewing your pieces together so you don't sew your creeper face on upside down or something. So I attached the legs by stitching them on in a few spots to make sure that they were secure. There's no rhyme or reason for how I sewed them on. I just wanted them to be nice and snug, so I picked a few points and just made sure that they were secure. Then I tied off the yarn and I pulled that yarn through the body of the creeper with the darning needle, so that when you cut off the remaining yarn, it kind of gets sucked into the body and you can't see it. Then I sewed the head on the same way, making sure that I had multiple attachment points so even a crazed toddler couldn't tear that sucker off if they wanted to. Then your creeper is done. Yay! Go you! It's time to marvel at your work. Ooh, ah, and give yourself a big pat on the back because you're awesome. I hope I've inspired you to go beg a knitter friend or relative to make a Minecraft creeper for you. Don't forget to share this video with them first. Or perhaps I've inspired you to make one for yourself. That would be amazing. And trust me, it's fun. You'll have this sense of accomplishment and fulfillment by doing it yourself. If you do make one, feel free to tag me on social media. I would love to see all of your projects that you've made. I don't know why it fills me with this weird sense of joy or accomplishment or something, knowing that I've taught people to make something. So go ahead, share those and tag me in them. Thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, give this video a thumbs up, share it wherever you please. Have an amazing day, and I'll see you next week. Bye.